we've got a real treat to co-host this with Anna Mihaylov, our Academic Director of Business and Finance. We're also lucky enough to have our guest, Borja Ureta. Borja has a really impressive career history that has seen him transition across several areas of finance over a decade of working at KPMG. He transferred from Madrid, and ultimately he has arrived at a position in New York as Senior Manager of Data and Analytics. So he's joining us live from New York, and at the same time, he has gone back to school, which we just love. So Anna, would you like to introduce yourself as well?
I'm really, really excited to welcome Borja. Borja is somebody who I think the students and everyone attending here would love to hear from, because at Kaplan Business School, we've been so passionate about our new Master of Business Analytics degree. We've been so passionate about it because we've seen it as a holistic degree. It's not just about data science. It's about integrating data science into business. And knowing Borja's history, he has embodied that, I think, in what he's done in his career. So a big welcome to Borja and everyone who's attending.
Very much for that introduction. My name is Borja Ureta. I'm originally from Spain, where I grew up, studied, and initiated and did a significant part of my professional career until I came to the US about 4 years ago, pretty recently. So it's just been the fourth anniversary, and it's been quite a journey. So I guess, maybe as a starter, I didn't sort of like make it in this world of data and analytics or business analytics, maybe as other people, because I came from more of a finance or economics background. Indeed, when I was in Spain, I studied business management and law. So I did a double major. I think Jim was mentioning earlier that he likes numbers. I think for me it was a little bit the same. I always liked numbers a lot. So I knew that law was not going to be necessarily the thing where I would develop my career. But something that definitely added up in a lot of the things that I did as a result of that. But anyway, to make the story short, after school, I'm the oldest of 6 siblings, and my dad said, like, hey, you're the oldest, you get to work with a family for 6 months at least, and then if you want to stay, you stay, otherwise you do your thing, and then the month 6, I thought, like, well, I've studied all this time, I really want to do something, by myself, and that's exactly when I joined KPMG, which, as some of you may imagine, that didn't go that well initially, but I think after a while it was like a really great decision, and in this case, my dad understood. But anyway, I started working in a team in KPMG in Spain called Global Transfer Pricing Services, where I did really learn a lot of stuff that was very useful after the fact. And initially when I joined KPMG, I always thought that I wanted to go abroad. That had always been like a desire or a life goal of mine, like just saying, hey, I'm going to go and work in another country and be exposed to people from all over the world if I can. And I was expecting that to happen a little bit earlier. I was thinking, well, after I've done 2-3 years, I'll just get the conversation started and hopefully I will go there. But things went a little bit different than I was initially expecting, because sometimes you don't realize, but time goes really, really fast, and there were a lot of things that happened while there. I was learning, I was progressing, and it's never the good time to make a big decision. But after I had made about like 6 years, I thought, okay, I want to go, I'm going to do it no matter what. This decision is made. And that process was kind of interesting, because initially I wasn't even thinking of moving with KPMG. I was actually opening other discussions, and the reason being is I thought the process would be a little bit slow, and I really wanted it to happen quickly. But I went on a conversation with my boss, and things turned out to be very well, because he said, like, hey, would you be interested in going to New York? And I thought, wow, that's amazing. Like, of all the possible places I could go to, I think New York is possibly one of the coolest. So like basically 4 months later, I was in the New York office in a team called Economic and Valuation Services, which is kind of similar. It's it mixes professionals that come from economics and finance backgrounds, where I did about 3 years of my career. And then, after a while, there were a couple of events that, made me reflect, like, is this what I want to do for the next 10 years, 15 years? How is this going to change? There was like a brainstorming that I went through by myself and also with some of the people that I have near me and mentors. And I said, okay, you know what? I've always been really interested in this world of analytics. And I think going back to school is the best call that I can make, even though I'm going to be working and studying at the same time. It's going to be a tough number of months, but I think it's the best decision. I didn't know where that was going to take me, but reality is that when I was like 60% into the program, there was like a very interesting opportunity to join the data and analytics team of KPMG, which was incredible because I would have never thought that it would have happened so fast. And yeah, that's where I joined last October. So it's been already, I think, over 6 months that I've been the data and analytics data and analytics team. And that's sort of like my intro.
Thanks, Borja. It's really interesting to hear the human perspective of what you've been through. I guess not just talking about the data points of the career that you've had, but how it was deciding. And I'm going to come back to the theme that you started about further study and changing countries, because a lot of the participants have gone through the same. But I might just start off with a few questions on business analytics, because I think for some students, even some students studying it, this term has been used so much in data analytics and data science. And I think that people want to understand really what it is. If I had to ask you, what is business analytics? What is data analytics? How would you describe it to our audience?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a great question, because even me myself, when I was starting the program, I was trying to figure it out. But reality is that actually, I think they are two quite different things. In my mind, I could give you sort of like the general answer, which is business analytics folks tend to obviously have a different skill set. They come more from the business sides. They need to have more soft skills, and they interact more with people. I mean, that's one aspect to it.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, data and analytics people are technically coming more from a computer science, more engineering background, and typically they need to have more deep skills in coding, architectures, deployment, and that kind of stuff. But I think at the end of the day, what it comes down is, and I'll give you just a small story. When I joined the Lighthouse team, there's this thing at KPMG called Just Ask sessions, and then some of the partners just say, hey, you know what, I have like this hour in the day, anybody can knock my door and come and chat with me. So I thought, okay, I'm new, I want to go meet the people, and I just met like the head of the team in New York, and I was asking him like, hey, how can I actually succeed in this team, right? And he gave me an explanation that to me was quite exemplary of the difference between data and analytics and business analytics. And he said, like, look, I have a lot of folks that are extremely smart. They're very savvy of, coding. They're very good at developing deep learning architectures and all that stuff. What I do lack is somebody that can, speak to the business, collect the business requirements, understand what the problems are, and then link that with the data science aspect by having a level of knowledge that is sufficient to actually, manage a team and command a team, but at the same time, bringing both worlds together. And to me, that's a little bit where, business analytics makes the difference. I think,
Right.
on top of that, I would just say that I think business analytics is a little bit more like decision oriented. It's more about, collecting data and trying to make it actionable, so you make day-to-day decisions to improve the performance. But, for me, it's like mainly the translator between both worlds, which are quite different.
Borja, you've beautifully described what we're hearing as well from industry here. And I guess my follow-up question is, given that there's a bit of a demand for this type of more well-rounded graduate, in your experience, what type of graduate is industry looking for in this area? We know data has now surpassed the value of oil, especially given the recent move in the oil price. This is really where companies can find value. What type of graduate are they dying for? What type of graduate are they really looking for?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. And I mean, I'm not going to surprise anybody by saying that obviously people that have an analytics background are in high demand across the board. I guess that's a fact. But I wanted to maybe talk about a couple of trends that I think are interesting that I've been observing in the consulting side. Because I guess when you get out of school, you can obviously go to the public sector, you can go to industry, or you can go to consulting. I guess I could talk a little bit about all of them, but I think the one that I really do know from experience is the consulting side, because it's the one where I developed my career. And I guess there are two things that are pretty interesting. As I mentioned earlier, before joining the data and analytics team, I was in a team called Economic and Valuation Services. And there I was actually the captain for recruiting for one of the schools here in New York for Baruch College. And we had these guidelines that were sort of like set up every year, like what kind of professionals are we looking for? And I think there's been quite a trend of evolution in that, because I remember first year it was like, hey, look for somebody with a master's of finance, look for somebody with a background in economics. But especially the last year I was in the team, anybody that had some sort of like quant related study, quantitative methods, statistics, business analytics, especially as well. All these professionals, they, when you compare like for like, that's always going to sort of like win over the other candidate. And I mean, of course, in the data and analytics team, they're looking for analytics candidates. But I think the reality is, even if you don't want to be in a data and analytics team, you're much better off getting a job nowadays if you have this analytics background. That's, I think, a very important trend. And also another thing that I wanted to mention is right now, I have more of a business analytics profile, but I am part of the data and analytics team of KPMG, and specifically I am within the artificial intelligence and natural language processing, which is, quite technical. But the reality is when I fell or when I joined the team, I sort of like learned the structure, and it was quite interesting because, it was something that I hadn't seen before. It was like quite a peculiar setup, because basically there are like 4 career paths that you can follow within the same team. And they are sort of like determined by the discussion that we were having a minute ago, like what's your background, right? So you can be a data scientist, like hardcore data and analytics, which is sort of similar to data engineer. They're the guys that do, big data, architecture, deployment, all that stuff. But then you have like a hybrid profile and a profile that is very akin to the business analytics world, which are data consultants and data modeler. So even within the artificial intelligence team, there is a high demand of this sort of like data consultant role, which is much more sort of like close to what a business analytics profile would be. So, at the end of the day, I guess, those are two interesting trends. And I guess the bottom line is the high demand of analytic profiles, all across the board in the consulting space.
Borja, that's really interesting. Could I ask you, as much as you can, to give us an example of a project that you might work in within this team? What might you guys do on a daily basis?
Wow, there's like a number of things. I'm gonna see how I can sort of describe it as general as possible, because
Yes.
we always have like this independence restrictions. But I'm actually working in a very interesting project that, if I had to summarize it, basically what we're trying to do is get data and analytics to sort of like substitute or think like a human brain, right? Like, so an analyst comes to the team, and this is for a finance team, right? And that's why it was a very good fit for me, because it was where I started. Because, I said like, look, my client is going to be my own team. But basically we train people for like 1 or 2 years to do a process called benchmarking, where you just go and somebody says like, hey, you know what? I have this manufacturing company in Eastern Europe, and I want to see what would be the benchmark in terms of profitability and a number of other things. So there is all this process where you identify like a number of companies and provide the company, like your clients, with certain insights. So right now we are building all that sort of like analyses that the analyst does as a result of experience, as a result of training and learning. Normally people that do this have about 2 years of experience. So we're building like a bunch of machine learning and deep learning models to sort of like do the work that an analyst would typically do, which doesn't mean that we're not going to need that analyst. It's just that the time that it's going to devote is going to be sort of like fully focused on value-adding things. That's one example, which I think is cool. I mean, I think apart from that, right now I'm working more on innovation and go-to-market, which is actually super exciting. But we're doing stuff like, for instance, linked to COVID, and I'm sure you'll you'll ask me about it eventually, right? But even like war gaming exercises. I don't know if you know about war gaming, but it's something that started in the military, and then it moved to the corporate world. And I think there is like, hey, you're a retailer. You're gonna like you're under this crazy pandemic. Like, how are you gonna reopen? What's going to be your new strategy? And it's sort of like bringing the war gaming concept together with analytics. So I think I can talk about my projects a lot, but I think
Yes.
the bottom line is that since I moved to analytics, what I can tell you is every project for me is like a little bit of a new world because everything is a little bit different than the other, quite challenging. And also I think if you like change and challenge, it's amazing.
Wonderful. Yeah, it sounds like you need an innovation mindset. Borja, you preempted my next question. I think we would be remiss if we did not mention the pandemic that's turned everyone's lives upside down. That's created a myriad of challenges, but also opportunities. In this setting, during the pandemic and post-pandemic, how do you think this industry and profession of business analyst is going to be affected?
Yeah, so I think that question is something I think we need to answer and like looking at terms. To be totally blunt, I think in the short term it's going to be not great, but it's not going to be great maybe for it's just sort of like a systemic aspect, right? Like the market is really bad. So, at the end of the day, there's going to be less people looking for new professionals, which is a fact. And that's going to sort of like impact across the board. But, I think that doesn't mean that there's not people looking. And I don't know, I guess Australia is in a much better position than the US is, because you guys know how the US overall and New York is doing. But even since I've been like under the pandemic, there's been like people reaching out for different opportunities and all that stuff. So it's not like the market has completely stopped. And I think the other day I was talking to a friend that works in analytics, and he said like, well, maybe not so many companies are looking for people, but the companies that are actually looking for people are the ones you want to work for. Because first of all, they're solid, and second of all, they understand the relevance of analytics, and that's why they're still looking for professionals. Having said that, I think that's sort of like only a short-term trend. I think the key thing there is like when you look at the midterm and the long term, I think this is going to be like fantastic for the analytics world. I mean, I don't want to be frivolous with the pandemic, right? But at the end of the day, what this is bringing is a lot of uncertainty. Like companies have no idea what the future is going to look like, whether there could be a second wave, how they need to reset their supply chains, their business models. There's all this sort of like question marks around their businesses. And I think at the end of the day, that's where analytics is going to bring value. I mean, you can think about forecasting, like for instance, even in KPMG, we have a lot of forecasting work, and there's like a huge investment on collecting data related to COVID, so we can incorporate that into models. There's also like simulation and optimization, aspects to it. So, I guess that is going to be, like a big trend in the future. For instance, today I was watching the news in Spain, and I was hearing that they're going to forbid sales in the retail. Like sales can only happen on e-commerce platform. They cannot happen in physical stores as a result of the fact that they don't want people to sort of like aggregate or to go in big groups. So at the end of the day, what's going to happen is like a lot of the businesses that were more like brick and mortar are necessarily going to have to transition to a much bigger digital presence. So that is going to have a huge impact and need of people with quant related backgrounds, analytics, and I think this is going to speed up the trend that was already happening anyway.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Borja. We're in our forecasting subject within our masters. We've actually had a bit of fun because we started off trying to forecast COVID cases and had to then go reevaluate our model. And another model we had was forecasting airline sales and flights, and we've had to go back. And it's been a fantastic evaluation of the models that we use. So I think it's very relevant. So now, Borja, I'd love to ask you, what what made you want to go back to study, and how did you approach this challenge of, you know, giving up potentially a promotion or different job to go back to the drawing board in a way? What was it like for you, and which option would you have picked, or did you pick?
Yeah, well, in this case, Anna, I think I'm gonna have to disagree with the with the majority of the room. You know, I mean, my case, I think I was far from conservative, to be honest. The way this played out is, I was, as I said, in EVS, and then a big opportunity presented to me where I could have had a big promotion. Um, you know, but that would have entailed moving to a different city within the U.S. And you know, it didn't end up happening for a number of circumstances, but I think that made me think, like, is this something I want to do for the next 5-10 years? And then there was even something that was also even more important. It's like, even if I wanted to do it for 10 years, could I actually have the same skill set and continue to work this in 20-30 years? And the answer to the first question was not sure, and the answer to the second question was like, I don't think so. So, you know, given those two answers, what I said is like, okay, I think for me, the best move is to go to school, because that's going to position me in the head for, you know, what I want to do next. So, I mean, obviously there were some people, and I spoke to a lot of people, but, you know, there's this partner that I used to work with, and he said like, man, you're crazy. You're going to go back to school, study something completely different. You know, you're going to have to do like 20-25 hours a week of studying, and you should be focusing on becoming a managing director on this, and just get your business case and do this and do that. And I'm sure that would have been, you know, a great career path as well. But I just thought like, look, I don't want this, because I think that maybe, and I think you ask about promotion, but, you know, promotion is again like a term concept. Like, you can think about promotion in the next year or 2 years, but you can also think where you're going to be in 5 years. And maybe in 1 year you're worse off than if you hadn't have made the decision. But I think maybe in 5 years you're going to be in a much better place. And that's sort of like what I'm betting on. So to your point, basically, I don't know if I gave up a promotion, but I definitely gave up sort of like a quicker career path in my old team, to be, you know, somewhat aggressive and go to a completely different team and see if that could play out well. Right now, I'm in the middle of that investment. It's looking good, but it's still early to see what's going to happen.
How has the process of going back to study been for you? Has it surprised you in what you've experienced through doing it? Did it meet your expectations, exceed them? What was your experience?
Well, so I hadn't been in school for a while, you know, and I had studied in Spain, although I did come to the US for summer sessions for a few years. But, you know, I think it's in all fronts, it's exceeded my expectations completely. I think there's a lot of elements to it. I think, first of all, like, I guess everybody likes to learn, but I think personally I really enjoy learning new things. And, you know, going to school and, you know, being exposed to all those professors that have a lot of experience and are teaching you all these amazing things, and just studying because it's something you like and you want to do. I think that's amazing. That's one aspect to it. I think a second aspect that I think is really critical of analytics and business analytics is that it's super practical. I mean, I remember when I was doing law, I mean, some parts of that are definitely practical, but it can be very boring. I think here you're always doing, or most of the time you're doing very cool stuff. And I think on top of that, there's like this element of networking. Like, you're working constantly with all these other folks that are as driven and as motivated and have many times, you know, similar career goals as you do. And, you know, partnering with those, you learn so much from everybody else. That at the end of the day, I think it helped me technically. It also helped me, you know, like from a networking perspective. And I think also one other aspect, and this is more like psychological, is like when you have to work and study and you're facing new challenges while you study all the time, when you go back to work and they come with a project and they say, hey, this project is difficult, we've never done it before. You sort of like say, well, I don't think that's such a big deal, because you sort of like have educated yourself on always going through something new, which I think is a very good mindset. So I couldn't talk enough of how good the decision of going back to school has been. And no matter what, if I went down 1,000 times, I would do it again.
Yeah, and as maybe a bit of a joke for our students, group assessments do serve a purpose, because they expose you to that kind of unpredictable nature. There's a lot of comments in the chat, Borja, saying they agree with you that people went back to study and found it was best for them. A young lady was wondering, she has a software and accounting background, I believe, and she's doing a business analytics degree. So I know you made the distinction between a business analyst and a data analyst, and she's wondering if she needs to do more courses in coding and programming, and how much of the technical she needs to really know if she wants to be a business analyst, if she wants to be more on the business side.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very good question. And again, I think it depends a little bit on what level of the hierarchy you fall into, you know. I mean, if I had to give sort of like one blanket question is, if you know coding, if you're good in R and or Python, that's going to be to your advantage no matter what. Because it's going to be helpful, and you're going to be dealing with people, no matter if you write the code or is somebody else, like knowing that is going to give you a big advantage. So I think it is a very good idea no matter what. Having said that, you know, you can sort of like transition to the analytics world in a different position, you know, like for instance, if you are in the first, like in the early, I guess, 3 to 4 or 5 years of your career, I think maybe it's more interesting because you're going to be doing more execution work, and there, like, you know, the insights and all that stuff is obviously very useful, but you're going to need to know some coding. I guess if you are at a more senior level, then it's less important. Like, you know, when I started in the data and analytics team, nobody was expecting me to write code from scratch. There are like people that have like, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4 years of experience that are going to do that. You're going to be supervising, you're going to be telling them, hey, let's try this, let's try that. We're going to build a recommender, how we're going to do it. But ultimately, a lot of the coding is going to be done by somebody else. So answer is yes, do it. But you know, the degree to which that's going to be crucial is going to depend on how senior you are. That would be my answer.
And yeah, it maybe correlates a little bit to what we tell students, where we teach them the basics of R, Python in our courses, but we tell them that if you draw a metaphor of a car, you're not the mechanic. The mechanic is the data scientist, but you're behind the wheel and you want to know if something's wrong with the engine. So understanding how the engine works is obviously important. Borja, if you could go back to yourself as a very young man starting your career and give yourself 5 pieces of advice for going forward, and I guess our students are at this point in their career, what would you say to yourself?
Yeah, I really like that question. I wish I could sort of like record it and go back to when I was, I don't know, 24 or 25. But, you know, I think if I had to summarize it in 5, first one I would say is, you know, curiosity. I think that's fundamental. I think, you know, especially folks like us that are interested in analytics and want to work in this world, you need to stay curious, always continue to learn and study. Like, for instance, even before I was doing my master's, I had a goal that I had to study between 5 and 10 hours a week, whatever it was. But, you know, always try to learn new stuff. That's a really good habit that I think is going to help you guys a lot, because even if you're good in Python, you want to be good in Tableau. If you're good in Tableau, you want to learn SQL. There's always something that you got to learn. So that's crucial. That's one thing. I think the second thing is always trying to make a habit of breaking your comfort zone. You know, like when you're in the consulting space, it's very common that people say like, you know what, I'm an expert in financial services. If this project is not financial services, give it to somebody else. You can be that guy, and there is like a career path to do that, but I wouldn't recommend it. I think for me, one of the things that has helped me the most, and also to make it to New York, because they don't send from KPMG Spain, they say, oh, you want to go to New York, we'll take you there. Like, you got to perform well. And I think one thing that helped me is every time somebody proposed me something that I had no idea, that's what I went for. Because I thought, okay, if I don't know how this is done, this is where I'm going to expand the most, and this is where I'm going to learn more. And that's going to open me up and expose me to more stuff. So I think the second one is as important or even more important than the first one. The third one would be like, I think you really got to be a good team player. Like, no matter how smart you are, no matter how hardworking, at the end of the day, by yourself these days, in a team, no matter if you do your own business, if you work for the public, for industry, I think by yourself, you're not going to do much. Like you need to be a team player. And what that means is that sometimes you are going to propose your idea and that's not going to be what's decided. Sometimes you're going to be flexible. Sometimes you're going to need to, suck up certain things, but it's the way it works. And I remember that there was one of the mentors that I had in KPMG Spain. She told me, you know what, maybe your decision or your idea could be the best. But at the end of the day, even though there is another decision that is the decision of the team, even if it's not as good, it's going to be much better because the fact that everybody embraces it makes it much more powerful. So I think the team player aspect is very important as well. The fourth one that I would say relates to mentors. I think having mentors is fundamental. There's going to be moments in your professional career where you're going to face very difficult decisions. When you change country, there is no good answer. You're leaving your family, your friends, you're going to another country. Things may be bad when you go there. There's like all this enigma around you. And I think what helps the most is being able to talk with a bunch of people. I mean, obviously you can talk to friends, but I think if you have mentors, people that are more senior than you, that have gone to some of the problems that you are facing, like talking to those people is going to give you a breadth of ideas and views that is going to help you really a lot on making the key decisions that are going to drive your professional career. And I think in parallel to that, you also got to sort of like payback, right? So for instance, now I also try to be the mentor to many of the people that I've been working with. And it's not uncommon that somebody reaches out and say, hey, hey, what should I do about this? What should I do about that? And I really enjoy, it's something I really like helping others and making some of the decisions that I had to face. So be a mentor and find for mentors. That's absolutely crucial. And I think the last piece of advice that I would have, maybe it's not so work related, but I think it's definitely very important, is that, I mean, I don't know what you guys are going to work in, but most likely you're going to expose yourself to a lot of pressure, a lot of stress. There are going to be moments where you're going to be working a lot. And I think having healthy habits of how to deal with that stress is going to be fundamental. Like, people say like, oh, New York is a tough city, blah, 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 but like the level of pressure that you can have here is, I compare it with Spain, but it's unparalleled. Like you can be under a lot of pressure. And I think the fact that you have a good routine, I can work X number of days, whatever, but every day I need to do, 1 hour of exercise, or I do yoga, or I cook, whatever it is. But I think, have your routine and don't give it away, because I think if you sort of like let yourself burn out, and I've seen this in other people, it's very difficult to come back. So always try to keep a good balance. Like don't be fully focused on work or anything, because I think that's not gonna help you. And that's it, Anna. Oh.